talk about the first Jew was Abraham. And the question is, why was he the first Jew? Because what we don't realize is that there were always small pockets of righteous people from Adam and Eve all the way down to Abraham. There was Methuselah, there was Lamech, there was Noah, there was always righteous people in every generation. So why do you say the first Jew is Abraham? There were other people that were his grandparents that were also righteous. Why does he get the title of being the first Jew? And there's two basic answers that are given. One is that as opposed to everybody else, everyone else sat in their little worlds and they waited for other people to come to them to find out about God. Right? They were all happy with their worlds. They knew the world is blowing up, is going crazy. Everyone's just going in nutty directions, and they're in their little circle, and they didn't view the world that their responsibility was to go and to solve and help and inspire and teach other people about God. They didn't believe that. They didn't have that view. And Abraham had that view. That's one of the explanations, by the way, in the Shema. It says, love Hashem your God. A lot of explanations, how do you do that, what it means. One explanation of what it means is to make others love him too. That means you can't just stay in your little bubble. So they were righteous people, but they were in their little bubble. So one reason Abraham becomes the first Yehudi, the first Jew, is because he says, I'm not staying in my bubble. I'm going to go and let everyone know that there's a God in the world. And I think that's my obligation to them and to God. So that was the first reason. The second reason why Abraham becomes the first Jew as opposed to his ancestors is because they all knew it by tradition. Meaning that Adam and Eve taught some people, their descendants, and there was always a group of people that had a tradition from their father and their father and their father. And the rest of the people were going out doing their own things and leaving this way of truth. But there was always a small cadre of people who were in the system. Abraham was the first one who was not in the system. His father was the head idolater in a place called Ur-Kasdim. He was a very close officer of the king at the time, King Nimrod. And what happened was he was an idolater. He was not a good guy. His name is called Terach. But the one explanation is it's from the word ratach, which is to anger. He angered God. His approach was to anger God, and he was a person that was very steeped in idolatry. In the end of his life, he changes, but that's really because of Abraham. That's Abraham moved it, and because Abraham became righteous, God, let that influence Terach, and Terach, eventually straightened out also. But it wasn't him. He was against it. So Abraham looks at the world and he goes and says, well, these people are bound to idols. This makes no sense. And he goes to a philosophical understanding of the idea of what we call prime cause. The prime cause is that everything else in the world is created. There's no way that these things can be the source of all existence. How did a person get there? Well, the parents. How did the parents get there? How did this iPhone get here? Well, there were parts. They put the parts together. Anything that's a composite of other things cannot be the source of everything because someone took those parts and put them together. Right? The parts of something has to be made. Right? And so the only thing is that you have to get to a place where there is nothing that is beyond that. That's the prime cause. It's tracing the world back to where did it all start from. That was Abraham did. He said, this can't be, the sun can't be God, the moon can't be God, and then he said there has to be a one source that has brought this all into existence. So he did it through his intellect and through his searching. And actually it says in a very amazing midrash, it says that he was trying to figure it out. He was searching, thinking, how is this happening? And it says he saw a bira deleket, he saw a palace on fire. He saw the world going crazy. And he says, but look at this whole thing. Look at all the components of this world. and they all, the world functions, it functions, and things are interconnected. And the world seems to be out of control, but there are these components that are all playing together, and therefore there must be a prime source. There must be an owner of this palace that created it. And that point, when he yearned for it, when he wanted it, it says that God revealed himself to Abraham, and he got prophecy. It says the Balabira, the master of this palace, of this world, as we speak, he looked down at Abraham and he inspired him. So there were two components. One is that he really wanted it, and two, he used his mind to question. And I want to tell you, and I don't want to make fun of any individual, but most of the people that come from various forms of different faiths in the world, one of the challenges is questioning. From a Jewish perspective, we encourage questioning. Questioning is the best thing you could do, because I'm not afraid if you question honestly, you will come out with the correct answers. The problem is when you stop along the way because you're afraid to really ask the questions, that's when the trouble starts. That's when people get stuck. So it's a person who's honestly thinking about things and deeply thinking about things will say, okay, so this is what it is. That's a problem. Let me ask about this. And you know, there are many religious systems that say, whoa, don't go there. And
you ask, everything is faith.
Yeah, that's a problem. So that's why, you know, and our whole system, we encourage the questions, because a human being is given a mind, and although the mind is limited in the sense that we don't understand God, we have a limit to what we can understand, but God didn't create us in a way to torture us that what our minds would tell us would be counter to the way the world is. It may be limited. In other words, when I look at the world, I have to make decisions based on my mind. So if everything contradicts the way the mind functions, that would be a very torturous system that God would be giving us. It would be really unfair. He would say, okay, believe in everything I'm telling you that makes no sense. Well, then why'd you give me a mind that's supposed to be fitting into how the world works? That's not our system. Although, and I mentioned this before, we talked about emunah, we talked about faith a few weeks ago. Although, yes, there's a certain jump-off point that you need, but it's always true. I mentioned last time, it's always true. Every human being, nobody knows anything 100%. Right? Descartes said, can't really prove you exist even. But when you have the propensity of evidence, you have the overwhelming ideas that show you something, then the human being could take the jump and say, okay, this makes logical sense, even though this part I might not get, but I make a jump. That's okay. When you go to a doctor, you know, if you know a doctor's good, and he went to a good medical school, and you've went to him before, and he's given you good advice, now I tell you something which you don't understand, you don't say, okay, no, until you teach me this whole thing, you know, explain to me everything about bacteria, and I'm not taking the medicine. You don't do that, because it already makes sense to make a jump, even though it is still a jump. But there are places like New Zealand which become issues of what's called the date line. And those have issues of which day is Saturday, and so some of these places have issues. A lot of places where they still keep the seventh day, but if there's 1 minute of, you know, the places up really north, they could have, you know, in Norway, you could take Shabbat in the summer at 12 o'clock at night. That's when it starts. And so it's all day beforehand. So yeah, I mean, there's two different parts. One part is that there is a calculation, but there are places that become issues in terms of dateline and other things. The moon calendar is something else. So you have like this. You have let's talk about the moon calendar a second. A day is defined by the sun coming up, sun going down. Okay, that's it. Now a year has different definitions for it. Okay, The Muslims count the lunar cycle only. Okay? The lunar cycle has 11 days less than the solar cycle. Okay? In the Western world, they count only the solar calendar. Okay? The Jewish calendar is a hybrid. Okay? It's a hybrid. It really has to do with the marriage of the sun and the moon. So unifying the sun and the moon. That's really why it's an amazing thing, because there's different explanations of what the 10 or 11 days is that separates the sun and the moon. The Vilna Gaon says those are the 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. The Jewish year starts on Rosh Hashanah, the beginning of the year, but there's like this 10-day period of like this sort of this quasi period, which according to one explanation is supposed to be the unifying, the catching up of the sun and the moon. The cycles are not exactly the same, sun and the moon, and so in a Jewish calendar you add a leap year. It's 7 for every 19 years is how it works out. The fascinating thing, the Maimonides records the sages of the Talmud in ancient days knew how long the lunar cycle was. 29 and a half days, but they knew it exactly. And Maimonides actually codifies what it to the 6th digit. And I saw a report that NASA put out about 15 years ago. After all their studies, they figured out exactly the length of the lunar cycle. And NASA, with all of its great technology, figured out what the Rambam, Maimonides, wrote a couple thousand years ago.
Yes,
Which is growing the Talmud. Yeah, they had it to the 6th, 7th digit. It was 29.5008. I forgot exactly 88, but it was literally, and that's why in the Jewish cycle we actually count the moon. We break the hours not into 60 minutes, but to 1,080 parts to get it exact. So the Jewish calendar is based on the lunar calendar. Okay, we count according to the moon. Every month is a month based on that 29 and a half days. And what happens in the Jewish months are either 29 days or 30 days. Okay, because of that, it's balancing. At the end of a certain time, usually about 3 years, there's an extra month that is added to the calendar. Okay, that's called a leap year. What that does is it lines the lunar cycle up with the solar system. The Muslims, for example, since they don't do that, their holidays, let's say they have the holiday Ramadan. And I don't know the name of the Muslim month it's in, but it goes throughout the seasons. But in Jewish law, the holiday of Passover always has to be in the spring. Okay? Now, since it goes by the lunar cycle, the month called Nisan, if you don't extend the year, then what's going to happen is every 3 years you're going to lose 30 to 33 days. Mm-hmm. So in 10 years you're in a different, 6 years you're in different seasons. So what happens is they go and we have a system to unify, to have the leap year that's added into the system that the moon and the sun unite. Now let's talk about a little just of a deeper meaning of that, because it's a very beautiful deeper meaning. That's just a simple calculation how it works. The deeper meaning that's very beautiful is that we see the sun and the moon as a certain type of marriage. And the moon's idea is to reflect the light of the sun, which is why we count the moon. Because what we're trying to do is reflect God's light in the world. And so we have to take that light and reflect it. The reason why we count to the moon is the moon waxes and wanes. The moon is not in a stable situation. It's how much light it's able to receive, how much light it's able to give back. That's the patterns of this world. In life right now, there's times ups and downs. And every month, we're commanded to renew ourselves, to start again. Like the moon, which starts again, gets a new energy, a new light. There are 12 months of the year which parallel the 12 tribes of Israel. And they also parallel the idea of 12. Because what happens is if I have one item, I have an item here, right? You look at it, it's a six-sided item, right? Everything in the three-dimensional world has six sides, right? Now, actually, can I borrow my book because it works better to show it in a bigger thing here. So you see, it's three-dimensional item has six sides, and it's called, the item itself is called the seventh. How many days of the week are there? There are 6 days of the week, and the Shabbos is the seventh. The Sabbath is the seventh. Everything in a three-dimensional world has six sides, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 has six sides. Okay, the item itself is called the seventh, and that's the energy pack that gives it the power. That's the 6 days of the week, and that is the Shabbos is the seventh. Okay, so everything has this. That the judgment is 6 and 7. Now, if you want to be real, expand a little bit more. If you count the lines here, it's called alachsonim, the lines of this, right? How many think there would be on a three-dimensional object? Right? You'll have 1, 2, 3, 4 on each side. I'm sorry, there'll be one. No, one more. This 1. Let's go from the top. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 12. Because the item, when it expands, it's called achsonim, it's called the diagonals or the points of expansion. It's the 12. That's the 12 tribes. The 12 tribes of Israel expand to be 12. That's the 12 months of the year. Every tribe of Israel parallels one of the months. And that's the whole, it's fascinating because, you know, if you go inside the synagogue, you'll see there are pictures by one of the congregants named Lynette Joel. She drew these paintings of every month in every tribe. And myself and some other rabbis, and her son, gave her information about all the stories of every month and how it links in, who the tribe is, because they're completely interconnected. That's the 12. Now, if you notice in the Bible, though, there's really 12 tribes, but sometimes there's 13 tribes. Because if you notice that Joseph, he ends up having 2 tribes. He has Ephraim and Manasseh become the 2 tribes of Joseph. So sometimes we're 12, and sometimes we're 13. That's the leap year. That's the leap year. And that's also why, you know, in terms of... you mentioned before, God is one. The Shema, Hashem Echad, one. So if you look at the name Echad, one, oneness. One is the first letter is Aleph. That's one. That represents Jacob. And then the Chet is the second letter is the Chet. That's number 8. Every letter in Hebrew has a numerical value, right? Aleph is 1, Bet is 2, 8. Every has a numerical value. So the 8 is the tribes that come from Leah and her extension, which is Zilpah, and then the four tribes that represents Rachel and her extension is called Bilhah. So you have God is 1. It's the numerical value of the 1 plus the 8 plus the 4. The 8 and 4 are the 12 tribes. Right, from this mother, from that mother, and 1 is Jacob. Now that means, in a certain sense, so 1 is this item. 12 is what it expands to. The 13 in Jewish thinking is therefore the numerical value of oneness, and that's really kind of what happens right now. So we have the 12 tribes, but we want to unify and have the idea of the 13th. That's when it gets brought back in, and that unifies the system, and it becomes the 13th, that becomes the unifier. That's when it's the numerical value of Echad, of 1. And that also, like I said before, that is how you see the sun and the moon get lined up. That's a very big thing. Because on a spiritual, philosophical level, since we understand the sun and the moon have this interaction on a cosmic level of us reflecting the light of God, so we want the sun and moon to become one again. So we don't separate them. We keep them united. That's the power of the sun and moon. I think something about the moon because I'm in the mood to talk today. So the moon is fascinating. I mean, if you notice, the Jewish holidays are pretty much all on the 15th of the lunar cycle, right? That's pretty much all, because there are three festivals that we talk about in Jewish thinking: the Passover, Shavuot, and then Sukkot, the tabernacle. Now, the reality is that the Passover is in the 15th of the month, okay, and Sukkot, tabernacle, is the 15th of the month, 6 months apart. Literally the two poles, the spring and the fall, 15th of the month. The holiday of Shavuot doesn't really have a date. It's supposed to be 50 days from Passover. It doesn't have a date. It's really an extension of Passover. Now, why is the 15th of the month so important? The lunar cycle. What happens in the lunar cycle on the 15th of the month? It's a full moon. New moon is you barely see it just coming out. But when the moon is full, it represents reflecting the light of God into the world. That's on the 15th of the month. So the holidays essentially are the 15th of the month because it's the idea of being able to reflect that light. And that's why if you count from the time that Abraham, 15 generations, you will get to the 15th generation is King Solomon, Shlomo. He's the one who builds the temple. But the word Shlomo means whole. Right? The word shalom in Hebrew, which everyone knows means peace, really means from the word to be whole. His job was, he potentially could have been the Messiah. His job was to go and to be the whole one. He built the temple. He was the one who theoretically could have, brought the world to its next level. That's called the Messiah, been the son of David. He could have been. He didn't make it for various reasons. He tried to. He did some amazing things. He tried, but he made a mistake. And so, but that's the 15th of the month. That's the lunar calendar reflecting its light back. That's what we're doing. That's how we count. So we count by the sun and the moon. And that's what's a lot of the Bible. Just Passover. Passover has to be in the spring, because Passover is the holiday of what?
Everything growing.
Yeah, and what happens in the Bible?
Leave Egypt.
Freedom. Mm-hmm. It's built into the system. It's not an accident. Freedom means that you feel trapped, and then you're free. That's winter, all of a sudden into spring. So the holidays are intrinsically built into the system. And you asked me about people living, in crazy places. That's why the holidays are centered around Israel. If you live in Israel, you have the good part for Atlanta is that we're a little bit on the same latitude. So sometimes we get like a little bit the seasons. I lived in Montreal, and Sukkot, tabernacle. I'm sitting out in my little hut, and I'm like, it's freezing. That's not the way it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be like a nice time. You're sitting there, so it's not. But I'll tell you the good news. It's an amazing thing what's happening right now with Israel, because what's happening politically is a crazy stuff. And this whole thing about the Temple Mount, I mean, what is that? It's not an accident. I gave a class on it. You can look, it's online. I gave a class last week where I went through the whole thing and I explained what was happening with the Arab nation and the Jews and how this plays out. But really, this is a spiritual discussion. It's not an issue of land. The Arabs don't really care about the land. If you look when they gave Israel the partition happened in 1948, can you guess how much of the landmass of the entire Middle East Israel was? So there's all Arab nations around. How much was the landmass of the state of Israel when it was first given over compared to all of the Arab nations around? It was 0.06%. Meaning that 99.9% of the land was Muslim land. This little tiny spot, and that's what the whole thing's about. This 0.1%. Why is that? Because it's not about land, really. It's about a philosophical discussion. And that's why having the Temple Mount is not an accident either. Because the Muslims, when we talk about the story in the Bible and Abraham brought Isaac as an offering, they substitute and say that it was Yishmael, their father. And so the Temple Mount, which is the holiest place in Jewish belief, that's called the place where the heavens kiss the earth. That's where I got the title of the book from, by the way. That's where it is. It's not a promotion. That's literally where I got the title from. It's a place called Shemaim Aranashka, the heavens kiss the earth. That's the central point. That's the point where God created the world. That's the point where it meets. That is mentioned countless times in the Torah. It's not mentioned in the Quran even once, right? Everyone knows 700 times they mention Mecca, 350 times mentioned Medina. Jerusalem's not mentioned ever, because that wasn't the place. And there are even some Muslim clerics who say the same thing. There are some Muslim clerics who, most not, but say that really this was the place of the Jews. So what happens is that the question is, who does this place belong to? Who does this marriage point where God connects to humanity, who has control of it? Who's it for? And so what happens is that the issue was never the metal detectors. They had metal detectors in Mecca also. It wasn't metal detectors. When you go to the Hajj, when they go up to Mecca, they go to metal detectors also. That wasn't the issue. The issue was that the Muslims found it very disturbing to go and say that this spot, which is the Jews' holy spot, is theirs, not ours. And so that was the discussion. It wasn't about land, and it wasn't about metal detectors. It was about who was the chosen one to be in that place. That's what the battle was about. And so that really comes back out to this point about, having this point in the land of Israel that we're supposed to connect to God, where the temple is supposed to be. And I quoted in this class, I quoted in Midrash that was written thousands of years ago that says the Muslims will actually build a building on that spot. They will try to sort of say, no, this is our spot. Now, the good news I want to tell you, though, and I mentioned this last week, is that the temple was supposed to be for all people. I want to realize that. If you look at Solomon's prayer, he says everyone should be answered. When Solomon built a temple, everyone had it good. There was no famines, there was no natural catastrophes. It was fantastic. So that's the central point, but the blessings come out from all of there. And that's why there's a very incredible teaching. It says, in the future, the whole world will be the land of Israel. And the land of Israel will be Jerusalem. What does that mean? I don't know if it would be called land of Israel, but a deeper meaning is that the holiness will spread out to the whole world. That's what we're doing here. We want the holiness to spread. If you get to the right place and you bring that down into the world, it should spread to all people. It shouldn't be, that's the way the world is. God loves all of his creatures. He wants to bring that to everyone. But we all have to understand what's really going on. And once that place is built, and 2 days ago was the day of the destruction. And it's like, I'm still reeling from it. It's literally the day of mourning. It's a day that we, Jews, and hard to understand this. Jews for 2,000 years have been sitting on the floor crying on this day. Mm-hmm. This is the day of death of the way the world is today. The world suffered a death that is unfathomable. When death happens, what happens is the soul separates from the body. And that's what happened. What happened was that God's presence was felt clearly on that place in the Temple Mount, and everyone felt it. The whole world was alive because God's presence was filling the whole world, and it was clear. There was total clarity, and the world was a great place. And then it got worse. The time of Solomon was great, and then until it was destroyed. And so we mourn this day of death when God's presence had left that spot. But the remnants of that presence is still there. And that's what we feel. We want life to come back again, and God's presence to be clear.
And he will come back.
Yeah, God's presence, we will build. I mean, he's always here, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not. Right now, God's presence is much more hidden. And yes, and there will be a third temple, and God will, reveal His presence in a clear way. That's the idea of messianic times. So, talking about, and this was an issue, in terms of Christian theology, where in Christian theology, the early Christians knew that there was this idea of the Mashiach comes, the Messiah comes, the world will be transformed. Now, there's a whole long discussion what that means. I'm going to take, before I get to the Kabbalistic explanations, the simple explanations, we'll talk about Kabbalism another time, God willing, but the simple explanation is that there's clarity in the world. The world's a clear place. And there's peace, and there's long life, and there's prosperity, but not focusing because of the physical things, although that would be good too, but the reason why the physical things are good is because the spiritual things are good. Mm-hmm. If you live in a world that you feel God's presence and there's clarity, all the other stuff is kids play. So that's the idea of what the idea of Messianic times is. It's not that the Messiah is a human being. And what happens is he just ushers in this time where there's this time that God's clarity is built back in the world. And in Jewish thinking, in our tradition, the world has a 6,000-year time frame. From the time of Adam and Eve's creation, and not from the time of when the world was first formed, that was more than 6,000 years, we'll explain that another time, God willing. From the time of Adam and Eve's creation, there's a 6,000 period of time maximum that the world could go in its present state. After that 6,000-year period of time, what happens is the world will move into a greater consciousness, which is called Messianic times. Now, it could happen from any point after the year 4,000. Could. Theoretically, it could. And if it doesn't happen, it's got to happen by the year 6,000. Now, so the way that we get there is by the world going through the challenges that we go through, and there's really two ways. One is that people get clarity and they understand the truth, and they do tshuva and they repent and they see God clearly. And the second way it can happen is if people don't get their act together, God's like, I have a time and we're going to make it happen. And there could be cataclysmic things that happen before that. Now, but when the Mashiach comes, it ushers in the new period of time where people will have a higher state of understanding. I mean, at the early stages of Mashiach, of this period of time, the world is still functioning as it normally does. Right? But the Jews will be in Israel. They will rebuild the temple. There'll be clarity in the world. There'll be peace in the world. There'll be brotherhood in the world. And physically there'll be things that'll be changed as far as disease and removal of sufferings in a lot of ways. But it still will be in the first levels of the Messianic period in a world, it's called Olam Kiminago Noahide. The world will function according to its ways, but not supernatural. That's another discussion when that happens. But normally, the world will be that utopian society we're looking for because of the clarity. Now, here came the problem in Christian theology, which was that everyone knew the teachings that when the Mashiach comes, the Messiah comes, the world reverts and goes into this state of like Adam and Eve before the sin, into a state of this beautiful society. So the problem was it didn't happen. According to Christian theology, if the Messiah came, then how come it didn't happen? So that's when the concept was created, the idea of a second coming. There's no basis for that in any place in the Bible. In the Jewish Bible, obviously. As the Christian Bible, there must be a place for it. But in the Jewish Bible, there's no such thing. And so what happened is that in the early Christians, when they thought that the Messiah had come, they said, well, what's happening? Oh, it's going to change any time now. And it didn't change. So they kept waiting. until the doctrine had to be created that, okay, there's a second, round two. We don't have such a you know, we don't have such a text. There's no such thing. And why you need round two? One's good. You know, at one time. That's what it says. So that's what we're moving toward. That's the times of Mashiach, when the world has clarity. And that really, right now, what's going on in terms of in the feeling, because I'm literally personally 2 days after this morning, we're coming out of mourning, and you feel it. It's like, so what happened this year on Tisha B'Av, I think more Jews had consciousness of the Temple Mount than ever before. You know, there's a discussion if a Jew should go up to the Temple Mount, anyone should go to the Temple Mount. And the reason for that is there are places that you're not allowed to go. There are places you can't go. There are places that it says that only the high priest in Israel can go. The person has to be what's called pure. It means he never came in contact with death. That's a problem. We don't have what's called the red heifer today. There's no way to become pure on that level. There are places that person can't go. That's why many Jews do not go up to the Temple Mount at all, because they're afraid they may go to the wrong places. There are some Jews, and I think that hopefully that they do know. They say they've studied the issue. They know where to go, and hopefully I haven't gone through it myself to see if it's correct. And my son maintains it's correct. I haven't studied with those rabbis to see if they know what they're saying exactly, but they maintain from their text they know exactly where to go. So they do go up. And this Tisha B'Av, this time around, was more Jews ever went up than ever before. 1,000 Jews went up. Now, hopefully they did it right, they went to the right places. But what it means to me is that this discussion about what happened with the Muslims, with the metal detectors, was also a wake-up call for the Jews, saying, all right, wait a minute, this is our place. I want to tell you, and I mentioned this in this class, it's an amazing thing. Now, share it with you, you need to know this. It says that the name of the father of the Muslims is called Yishmael. Yishmael. And if you read the text of the Bible, it seems to be he's called Yishmael because when his mother Hagar is sent away, and she first gets pregnant, and she sort of rebels against Sarah, and that's really the root of the issue. Who's the main wife? And she rebels. She gets sent away, and she runs away actually, and she miscarries that child. But what happens is God sends an angel, and the angel tells Hagar, go back to Sarah and subjugate yourself to her. She's the main wife, and her child will be the main one. But you could also be connected, but through Isaac. Go back, and God will give you a child, and you'll call this child Yishmael, because the word Shema, heard. God heard your cry. Okay, that's the simple meaning of the text. The problem is the word Yishmael does not mean God heard. It means God will hear. Says the Jewish traditions. So what does it mean? It's going thousands of years already. It's recorded in the time the Picture of Elazar. It says, what does it mean? His name is God will hear. It should be God heard. And the answer is God will hear the problems that Yishmael will cause the Jewish people at the end of time. And the Jews will call out, God will hear the Jews' cry from what's going on right now in the world. So the Jews got to call out. That's their strength is to pray to God. Call out and say, we want this place back for us and for the whole world. Everybody here at this table. Everyone watching in TV land. So first of all, you have to know something. That obviously shows you that it could not be.
Yeah, it doesn't say it's the moon and it's the sun.
No, I'm saying that means that people always ask the famous question. We see from science that the world is billions of years old. Now, is that true? Yeah, it's probably true. We didn't say anything other than that. What we said was that it's 5,777 years from the creation of Adam and Eve. But before that, it doesn't necessarily mean it was 24-hour days. And the proof to that is the first 3 days, there is no sun and moon, so it can't be. If the definition of a day is sun and the moon, so then it can't be. So how'd you call it a day one? How'd you call it day two? It doesn't mean that. It means epochs. It means periods of times, or it means, in Kabbalistic thinking, it means a certain aspect, a certain revelation, a certain dimension. So that's exactly right. It doesn't mean that. So the first answer, the simple answer, when people ask this question, the world is 15 billion years, what's the problem? Yeah, I don't see a problem with that. We're saying it's 5,777 from the time of the creation of Adam and Eve. Before that wouldn't be the case because, as you said, the first 3 days there's no days as is normally put. Now I'll tell you, there's two other great answers here. You should know this. It's worthwhile people to know this. There is one commentary that talks about 24-hour days. Noahide says this. There's a book. There's a wonderful person. His name is Dr. Gerald Schroeder. He wrote a book called Genesis and the Big Bang. I can't tell you the book is correct. I don't know. I mean, I read the book. And I know him, and a wonderful person. He's a scientist from MIT. I can't say the book is correct because there may be some questions that I may have on the book, but the concept is very nice. His concept basically is, he goes into this whole long discussion in this book showing how 6 days of creation in relativity, time being relative, and how it slows down with the greater gravitational pull. He makes a whole book to show that 6 days in the beginning of creation would actually equal 15 billion years.
So we are not talking about exactly like 1 day of us. It's not like one step. Like
that's right. So his explanation, and it's a very nice. Again, I don't know if it's true, but it's very nice. He actually goes through a whole mathematical calculation there. And he shows, because normally I would say that it's not talking about 24 hours at all. The simple answer is not talking about periods or whatever that is. That's the simple explanation. But there's one commentary that seems to say that that it is 24 hours period of time, which is not sun and moon, but somebody 24 hours. But he explains it that was talking about in different time, not the time of today, but the time from the beginning of he calls it from the edges of the creation, edges of the universe, which time would slow down. You can look at the book, interesting. But I'll tell you something that's even more fascinating. Can I borrow a pen and paper for a second? See if I can do this by heart, if I remember the calculation. But there's a Kabbalistic book. It's called the Sefer, I forgot the name now. It's Tamir, I think it is. Which says that this is the 7th cycle in the world. That there was this is the 7th cycle, and he calculates there in this book, if I remember correctly, I haven't done it for a long time, he calculates, so there were the 7th cycle, there were whatever the other cycles of 7,000 years, so it's 7 times 6, 42, and this is the 7th cycle of the world. Okay, whatever that means exactly. But in this Kabbalistic book, it comes out a calculation. It says it's 7 times. This is the 7th round. This is the 6th. How did it go again? There were 6 rounds before of 7,000 years, 42, and this is the 7th round now. And in this Kabbalistic book, it says that it's a verse in Psalms. It says that every day for God is like every day of ours is like 1,000 years. And this book makes the calculation there. If you calculate this, and it's 1,000 year, every day is 1,000 years, it comes out to be 15 billion years. And this book is written. This book is recorded. I mean, it goes back in the time of Moses, but this book is recorded over 2,000 years ago. But nobody thought the world was 15 billion years. That was like. Nobody believed that. So this Kabbalistic book has a whole calculation based on the principle of the previous cycles, whatever that means, whatever the worlds before this form is. But coming out with the calculation of 1 day is 1,000 years, as it says in the Psalms, and it would come out a calculation of the world is about 15 billion years, according to that. Yeah, I don't know if that's exactly right, but we're not. The answer to your question in short. I'm going to talk in a mood. Like I say, the answer in short is that that the time thing is not a problem, and fundamentalists should realize that, and not to, don't be ignorant. I mean, there's probably some pretty good proofs that the world is more than the universe is more than 6,000 years. I mean, it seems to be pretty evident. And that's not a problem, because we're not talking about that. We're talking about 5,777 from the creation of Adam and Eve. Before that is a different time, according to what we explained, and then the first 3 days. So the fourth day is obviously not based on the sun and the moon, because that wasn't created there, and therefore it's not days as we know them. Okay?
Mhm.